A tense new war of words is unfolding after high-stakes U.S.-Iran talks ended without a deal, and both sides are now blaming the other for the collapse. The fallout has been immediate: sharp public messaging, hardened red lines, and fresh uncertainty over what comes next for a region already strained by conflict, disrupted shipping, and political mistrust that runs deep. Iran's former foreign minister, Mohammad Javad Zarif, moved quickly to frame the breakdown as a consequence of Washington trying to impose conditions rather than negotiate. In a pointed social media response aimed at U.S. Vice President JD Vance, Zarif argued the outcome was predictable because the U.S. side was not willing to meet Iran's terms. He wrote, Zarif said, "Want to know why negotiations failed? They refused our terms." Bingo. He followed with a broader warning that any agreement built on pressure would be doomed, insisting Iran would not accept a deal shaped by coercion. His message, in essence, was Hat Iran sees sovereignty and leverage as non-negotiable, and that it will not sign onto an arrangement it views as dictated. From Washington's perspective, the failure was cast in starkly different terms. Vice President Vance, who led the U.S. delegation, said the talks ran for 21 hours and still did not produce what the United States says it needs most: a clear, durable commitment from Iran that it will not pursue a nuclear weapon or the capability to rapidly obtain one. Speaking after the discussions ended, he described the outcome as a strategic setback for Tehran more than for Washington, and said the U.S. position had been communicated as clearly as possible. Vance said, the bad news is that we have not reached an agreement, and I think that's bad news for Iran much more than it's bad news for the United States of America. He added, Vance said, we've made very clear what our red lines are, what things we're willing to accommodate them on, and what things we're not willing to accommodate them on, and they have chosen not to accept our terms. Vance framed the central dispute as a question of intent and verification over time, an assurance that extends beyond the immediate moment and survives changing political circumstances. He said, Vance said, but the simple fact is that we need to see an affirmative commitment that they will not seek a nuclear weapon and they will not seek the tools that would enable them to quickly achieve a nuclear weapon. And he underscored the U.S. demand for a long-term guarantee, not a temporary pledge. He said, Vance said, but the simple question is, do we see a fundamental commitment of will for the Iranians not to develop a nuclear weapon, not just now, not just 2 years from now, but for the long term? We haven't seen that yet. We hope that we will those statements set the tone for what has become a familiar deadlock: pressure versus sovereignty, verification versus mistrust, and the question of whether diplomacy can function when both sides believe the other is acting in bad faith. The talks were held in Islamabad, with Pakistan facilitating. By both accounts, the discussions were intensive and extended, involving multiple rounds and constant communication with senior officials back in Washington. Vance emphasized that the U.S. team remained in close contact with President Donald Trump throughout the negotiating window and described the U.S. proposal as the final offer on the table. Vance said, we were constantly in communication with the team because we were negotiating in good faith. He also said, Vance said, we leave here with a very simple proposal, our final and best offer. We'll see if the Iranians accept it. Adams' team, Iran, meanwhile, presented the lack of an agreement as neither surprising nor definitive. Iranian officials signaled that they had not expected a comprehensive deal to be reached in a single session and suggested that the issues are too complex and the gaps too wide for a quick breakthrough. One Iranian account said there had been some understandings on certain points, but that several crucial issues remained far apart, preventing consensus. An Iranian spokesperson described the negotiations as complicated and evolving, with new topics introduced during the latest round. Issues that, from Tehran's perspective, touched directly on regional power balances and national security. The message from Iran was that the agenda had expanded into areas that cannot be resolved through rushed bargaining, and that any lasting agreement must recognize what it calls Iran's legitimate rights and interests. At the center of the dispute is the Strait of Hormuz, one of the world's most strategically important waterways and a critical artery for global energy flows. Iran's negotiating posture, as described in the discussions, included demands tied to control and security arrangements in and around the strait. That alone places Tehran and Washington on a collision course, because the United States and its partners have long treated freedom of navigation through Hormuz as a core interest, while Iran has repeatedly signaled it views the waterway as a point of leverage in times of crisis. Iran's side also pushed for a wider package beyond nuclear issues, one that folds in regional conflict dynamics, sanctions relief, blocked assets, and compensation. The Iranian view, as conveyed through its messaging, is that a nuclear-only framework is insufficient when Tehran believes it has paid heavy costs economically and militarily, and when the broader regional environment remains volatile. In the aftermath, Iran issued a warning for Washington to avoid what it called excessive demands and unlawful requests. The Iranian Foreign Ministry spokesperson Esmail Baghai described the discussions as intensive and said the success of any ongoing diplomacy depends on the seriousness and good faith of the other side. He criticized past breaches of commitments and highlighted deep mistrust, particularly in relation to Israel's actions in the region, signaling that Iran's negotiating stance is shaped as much by past experience as by present objectives. Despite the hardline tone, Iran also publicly thanked Pakistan for hosting and facilitating the talks, indicating that channels remain open even if the latest session ended without agreement. Pakistan, for its part, projected optimism about continuing engagement, emphasizing the need to sustain dialogue and uphold ceasefire commitments. The overall message from Islamabad was that mediation remains possible and that further contact, whether direct or indirect, could still happen in the days ahead. But the bigger question is whether there is sufficient political space on either side to move. Washington is insisting on a clear commitment that Iran will not pursue a nuclear weapon and will not seek the tools to rapidly reach that capability. Tehran is pushing back again, stand what it sees as imposed conditions, demanding recognition of its interests, and tying any durable arrangement to broader regional and economic terms. As the two sides traded blame, reports circulated about competing proposal packages. Iran's reported proposal included demands such as a guaranteed end to the war and a set of regional conditions tied to allies and partners. The U.S. reported proposal, in contrast, focused on restricting Iran's nuclear program and ensuring the Strait of Hormuz remains open. Those are not simply technical differences. They reflect fundamentally different priorities and narratives about security. Iran's negotiating posture also included demands described as non-negotiable. Among them, control-related arrangements over the Strait of Hormuz, war reparations, unconditional release of blocked assets, and a full ceasefire in Lebanon. These demands show how Tehran is linking the nuclear file to a broader regional settlement, something Washington has historica. LEI resisted, preferring narrower agreements that can be verified and enforced without becoming hostage to every conflict line in the Middle East. The talks also took place against the backdrop of a fragile ceasefire and an ongoing war that has reportedly killed thousands and rattled markets. That wider conflict environment is not just context, it is leverage. Every day that fighting continues, the costs rise and the pressure on negotiators intensifies. But that same pressure can also harden positions, especially when leaders fear that compromise will be framed at home as weakness. In the middle of this, the Strait of Hormuz remains a flashpoint. Not long after the diplomatic effort faltered, U.S. Central Command said 2 American warships transited through the strait, described as part of a mission to clear the waterway of sea mines allegedly placed by Iran. The transit was a visible reminder that military posture and diplomatic posture are moving in parallel, and that one can quickly, why overwhelm the other if tensions spike? The presence of naval forces combined with the collapse of talks raises the risk of miscalculation. Even if neither side wants a direct confrontation, the Gulf is crowded, nerves are frayed, and the stakes are enormous. Any incident, real or alleged, could become a trigger for escalation, particularly if political leaders feel they have already exhausted the diplomatic track. Iran's messaging, however, suggests it wants to keep the door open while shifting blame. Baghai's remarks centered on good faith and seriousness, implying that Tehran is willing to continue discussions if Washington changes what Iran calls unreasonable demands. Iranian media also signaled that experts on both sides had been working to find common ground and that the Pakistani mediator had been trying to narrow gaps. That suggests the talks were not purely performative. There were areas of partial understanding. But the most sensitive issues, nuclear assurances, Hormuz, sanctions, and regional conflict, remain stuck. For Washington, the public line is that Iran refused to accept U.S. terms and that without a credible, affirmative commitment on nuclear weapons, no agreement is possible. Vance's comments emphasized that point repeatedly, framing the U.S. objective as preventing not only a weapon, but also the rapid acquisition of the means to produce one. That is a crucial distinction. Washington is not only focused on declared intent, but also on capacity and timeline. For Tehran, the argument is that Washington is demanding too much control, too many conditions, and too little respect for what Iran views as its rights. Zarif's blunt social media response captured that posture in a single line. an insistence that negotiations failed because Washington would not accept Iran's terms, not because Iran rejected compromise outright. And so the stalemate continues, with both sides presenting themselves as the reasonable party and the other as the obstacle. The immediate result is a diplomatic pause. But the broader impact could be felt in oil markets, regional security calculations, and the internal politics of both countries. Because once talks collapse, the next steps tend to follow a familiar pattern. More pressure, more military signaling, more rhetorical escalation, and then, eventually, another attempt at dialogue when the costs become too high to ignore. That cycle may already be starting again. Reports suggested the United States was moving additional military assets toward the region after the Islamabad talks ended without agreement, while Iran issued warnings against excessive demands and reaffirmed that its negotiators would defend national interests. The question now is whether either side can break out of the pattern, whether Washington can find a formula that satisfies its nuclear concerns without appearing to concede leverage, and whether Tehran can secure economic and regional guarantees.